Hello, Global Theater. My name is Jerry Fialka. Today is March 1, 2023. We want to thank Rob Grant and his amazing podcast, I'm Probably Wrong About Everything. It's an honor and a pleasure to be here with Lisa Carrer. Say your last name for me once.
You said it exactly gorgeously right. Lisa Carrer.
Yay! Lisa Carrer. And
Yeah.
this is part 2. I am so excited.
Yeah.
So, I normally get through maybe 30 to 50 questions every 90 minutes, and we got through 12 in part 1. But we went all over the place, and it was so fun.
I led you a merry chase.
Oh, it was so cool. And believe me, I loved reviewing it. And I rarely ever review any of these. And when I have a part 2, I have to review them so I don't sound redundant. So Lisa, tell us the tipping points where you're going to high school, then you're going to college. What are you pursuing? And then where's your tipping point to become a clown and then a musician? I'm just sort of not just briefly, but where's your tipping points? Like, who are you? Like, I showed you the book I found, Clowns for Beginners. What a review of clowns, tricksters, fools, Marx Brothers, Bear Rabbit, Signifying Monkey, Nasruddin the Tale-Telling Sufi, Shakespeare's Fools, Pee Wee Herman. I mean, who are you growing up with seeing that you go, I can... Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
It's just such a beautiful history that you mentioned here. Clown is about as basic as you can get when you think of humanity. And I'll just say the other day, I put a little comic relief on my Facebook because Ms. Green, you know who I'm talking about, Ms. Green of the Republican Party, mentioned how since Biden's been president, 6 billion people have crossed the border. And I thought that was a great little clown bit. She's a scary clown, but it has to do, when you ask me about high school and into college and things like that, everybody has a different story. I graduated early from high school. I was already doing theater. I started doing theater when I was, maybe around 7. It was when I first understood that I was going to be a performer. But I was doing professional theater when I was just out of high school. We had dinner theaters back then. So I am, one of the things I'm most accustomed to in my life is getting up on a stage. It's very comfortable for me. But it wasn't until many years later when I went to an artist colony called Palinville Inner Arts Colony. That's where I met Hank, by the way, Hank Rosenfeld. And I went there as a composer, but while I was composing in my little studio, I might have mentioned this, but this little clown car would go by with all these clowns on it, and that was Bond Street Theater Coalition. Yeah. So Bond Street, I'll say that they were my entree into clown. But I think the interesting thing is I've probably always been a clown, but they helped me to understand that connection.
But who were you seeing on TV or in the theater that sort of, let's say, influenced your feelings about humor? Because that's what we usually think about clowns. Were there any,
well, yeah. I mean, I'm such a child of the 60s and 70s in terms of, I love Jerry Lewis, but it was more that when I first started acting, I was always cast in comedian roles. I was a comedy actress.
Yeah,
you could get a laugh out of an audience real easy. That's not where I have stayed in my adult life, but I was mostly doing comedy. Neil Simon, Butterflies Are Free, Owl and the Pussycat. I was doing, all these major roles, but they were comedic in nature.
Yeah.
And so it's more like an onion, where I didn't really understand I wasn't well versed in commedia until later in my life, until I moved to New York City. But I always did have a propensity for I can be pretty funny. I mean, I'm a serious person, I think, actually. I have a lot of serious stuff going on in my brain, but uh, and this is something I share with our friend Hank. Mercurial witticisms that we get into, and it's fun. Once your brain starts firing on all those, on all those synapses, clowns are just a beautiful community for that sort of thing. Always looking, always aware, very self-aware clowns. Clowns are very self-aware people, I think. Aware of ludicrousness.
Ludicrous. Yeah, I love all these terms you're saying. You're a wordsmith. And it's funny because I worked for George Carlin for a half a year, and we got a flyer in the mail once, and it says, "I'm trying to get more control over my spontaneity." And it is,
Oh my God.
And yeah, big shout out to Hank who introduced us. So on that, let's stay on there before we go into art, performance art, and installation. What is the function of laughter?
Well, these days it's a survival tactic. If you can't laugh right now, you've got a finite sentence going on. It's such a dire time. So, but it's funny that we have Darwinian selection has created this strange response, and it's because of our consciousness, I suppose, and the fact that we need to we have this amygdala in the brain that deals with anxiety and fear, but what deals with a situation that has no that's ephemeral, something you can't put your fingers on.
Yeah.
And that's where humor often comes in. You see, I laugh a lot now. I mean, I do a lot of laughing to myself, sometimes in the most dire circumstances, but it's because I know that we have a finite amount of time, and if I told you some of the stories that are going on right now, just in terms of my teaching, the excuses my students will come up with to not go to class. I mean, like, they're really brilliant. It's brilliant. They're clowns. They're being clowns. The stuff they come up with, it's literally unbelievable. The stuff they come up with.
Well, that's beautiful because Gurdjieff said that laughter is the reconciliation of yes and no. And I sort of like this, the two fools' faces smiling, the drama smiling and frowning. But McLuhan loved to quote Steve Allen, who said, behind every joke, there's a grievance. And I'm curious your thought on that. And I sort of put the word every aside. Behind jokes, there's a grievance. What do you think of that?
Well, I think that oftentimes when you get to the point where you're confronted with something that is so okay, let's not think about morality or all of those things, but just something that your humanness is telling you, this is just so wrong. But you can't maybe you can't kind of put it on the table for one reason or another, because of the denialism in the situation or whatever it is. That's when humor comes in. You have to just give it up. You just have to give up rationalizing it or being self-righteous about it, or you just have to laugh because you just have to.
It's sort of like a cure or a therapy or I don't know if it's a cure or therapy, but it's a method of dealing with the word, like you said, humanness.
Yeah, it's like it's self regulating. If you can laugh, you can self-regulate the situation so that where you might be, clowns are such a perfect example. They're the story is, crying on the inside, laughing on the outside, but it's really knowing what the underside of the situation can be. And clowns choose to, see it, to transcend it as much as possible.
Yeah.
In whatever way they can.
Yeah. So, we grew up with like Mad Magazine, so we didn't have to go see the film Rocky. We could just read the satiristic, take on it. Yeah. And then we grew up with Saturday Night Live, sort of what was called fake news, but it was satire news
Mhm.
in Harry Shearer. And then
Mhm.
it's they changed the word fake news to satire news because this other thing came in and blossomed called disinformation. It's always been there, but we really have gotten, inundated with people like Jon Stewart and Stephen Colbert. And we grew up with it with Johnny Carson, but it's sort of satire news. In the big picture, do you think this more activates us or more pacifies us? You know, we know that 60 Minutes could be like investigative journalism, but a lot of people entirely get their news now from somebody like Colbert, which is doing it as a satire news. There's some hard news in there, but the overall structure is satire news.
If you're lucky, you're going to listen to Colbert, you know, or when we're lucky, Jon Stewart will wander into the
Yeah.
studio and spout a little bit. But he's mostly overwhelmed these days too, it seems. But no, I think it's the other side of the coin that we are so beyond what satire used to be. Most of us don't have the good fortune to listen to news that might have a humorous edge to it, but is basically factual. Most of us don't get around to the facts at all.
Yeah.
If you think of the news feeds that most people, and I deal a lot with the younger generation with my students, for example, in their 20s, I don't know how they get around to factual news. It's not satire anymore. It's not a parody anymore. It's something that's way beyond what we ever thought satire could be. Um,
That's funny because, I used to ask this question, can satire be destructive? And my friend who wrote Comedy with Robin Williams said, that's the job of satire. Now, it's hard to suss this out because basically, if me or you drew a cartoon in a certain country and they killed us because of the cartoon we drew, people think sometimes that death is destructive. But Jonathan Swift said that satire compared satire to a mirror in which people could see every face but their own. In fact, Frank Zappa wrote a song that goes, watch the Nazis run your town. Now go home and check yourself. You think we're singing about somebody else. So it's like this idea. What is the function of satire?
I'll just quickly tell you that one of the just because right now, I'm an artist, but I'm also an adjunct professor. So,
Yeah.
but education is becoming more and more important to me in terms of trying to, leave my students with something that they can chew on for their lives. And one of the things, I don't know if you ever heard of this essay, but this guy, Horace Minor, in the 60s, wrote this essay called Nasi Rema. Nacirema. And it's this weird essay where he's writing about this strange tribe that lives between the and he gives the coordinates in this essay that is actually North America. But he talks about these weird people who have these strange temples and they go to these holy mouth men but actually, if you spell Nasi Rema backwards, it's Americans. And it's a satire. It's a great essay. It's really fun, but it's an essay to show you how easily, if somebody arrives here in America, they have no context for what they're looking at. I don't know, they come from another planet or something. And they try to chronicle what we're doing here. We seem so bizarre to them. And so when I give this to my students, only like maybe 5% of them get that we're talking about ourselves, that this
Yeah.
essay is a satire. And back in those days, so when you talk about satire, it's you're exaggerating, you're stereotyping, but you're using it in a service. There's a service to this, which was what Carlin did so
Yeah.
very beautifully.
Yeah.
Satirized us so we could just keep looking at ourselves and going, what bizarro people, look at these bizarro people. And then it's like you realize, well, holy shit, it's us.
Yeah. Like seeing with new eyes is sort of how they say it sometimes.
Yeah.
So when you create, and then you go from 10 years of being a clown, then you start gravitating into being a composer and a musician more so, and an artist. A screenwriting, now we talk a little about that. A screenwriting teacher told me great art is when you can clearly see the intention of the maker. Stanley Kubrick says the opposite. Great art is when you can clearly not see the intention of the maker. What role does intention play in your creative process when you're composing a piece of music or making a new piece of art?
Well, those two examples you just gave, and I'm a Libra, so this is perfect. Like I'm just right in the middle of those two things, where we, as an actress, for example, you learn methodology, and one of my chief teachers was Uta Hagen. She wrote a book called, I think it's On Acting. I forget the name of it. It's all the number one. The number one rule is intention. That it's the word. What is your intention? But the thing is, our brains are so interesting that we instinctually do a whole lot of things every day. We do a lot of things on instinct. And so that's where I feel like my art practice really lives. It's I'm always like I told one of my students the other day, I was commenting on an essay, and I said, I'm always ready to have my consciousness raised. I'm always doing that. That's one of my gigs. That's one of my jobs, is waiting, to see, is there another opportunity to have it raised? But as I'm doing that, I'm also sucking in a lot of information. As an artist, as an educator, as an intellectual, as a clown, all these different things, as a filmmaker, as a composer, all these different things. And the more, like Darwin says, the more, when you have a really big idea, and I might have mentioned this the last time, but the more data, the more stuff you can collect, the more that you're going to be able to kind of root around in all of this information. And that's where instinct comes in, and start pulling in those things that you're supposed to be doing. And the beautiful part of it, right now anyway, while I still have enough brain cells left, is I trust the instinct. So sometimes I don't even really know what I'm doing. I know it. It's not like I'm not going to pretend like I don't know it. I know I'm going in a certain direction, but my instincts are working on that for me, so that there's these little arrival points as you go along the highway of an action, and then instinct is the thing that I feel shows me the way often. And that's what we have as human beings. Animals have instincts, but they don't question them, or they follow them. But we have these weird consciousness things that we're always dealing with, and we can question our instincts if we wish. But I tend not to.
That was good, Lisa. It brought up a lot, because I'm a fan of Marcel Duchamp, and he was at a cocktail party, and they go, "So what do you do?" And he goes, "I'm a breather." They go, "Hey, I'm a breather too. We have something in common." In what you talked about. Yeah, me too. I'm a breather. But we don't breathe consciously. Like, to consciously breathe during the day is really important. But we're just on automatic pilot breathing, and it just happens. So you can raise your awareness, how you talked of just now.
Wait, I got to mention something to you. So breathing. So I swim 3 times a week and work out and stuff. But so today I'm swimming. I do my 40 lengths. But and I'm doing the crawl, and I'm thinking, oh, you're breathing. How are you breathing? And a part of me, because I'm, it doesn't matter how much you swim or how much you run or whatever, you're always kind of working on your technique, trying to get better. Raise the elbow, make it seem as if you're about to hit somebody. I had this guy once, but today I was literally really thinking about this as, I'm doing the crawl, and as I'm putting my head up, I'm wondering, oh, when do you breathe, Lisa? And I was actually this is one of the things I was thinking about when I was swimming today. At what point, Lisa, do you breathe in? And at what point do you breathe out? In as simple a thing as the crawl,
That is so cool. It reminded me of this woman I read about. She's a dumpster diver, and her bumper sticker says, pick trash, not fights. So you like, it's like you're fighting, you know. So the other thing you evoked was Gary Player. The more you practice, the luckier you get. And the more you are conscious, then the luckier you are when you're trying to tap into the spontaneous instinctual.
Yeah, but it works the other way too, you know?
Yeah,
If you're hyper conscious all the time, it can be a real it can be a curse as well.
that's right.
I've been thinking a lot about that lately too.
Yeah. But back to Duchamp, he said there's no art without an audience. When you're composing your music, making your film, you
Yeah.
know, doing an installation, how much do you think of your audience?
Well, I think of myself as the audience oftentimes when I'm working. So I'll try, you know how, I don't know if you've ever done this, but I have to do this a lot. Like you write a cover letter or you write an application for something
Yeah,
and you're writing it, but then you have to run around to the other side of it and you have to read it like the person who you're writing it to is reading it.
yeah,
And so I try to kind of, and I tell my students this a lot too. And this is my actually my rule number one is that you don't just look at something and like you have to examine it. You can't just look at it. You have to actually examine it, which means you have to start circling around the thing. So when you ask me, am I thinking about the audience? I am, but also this word empathy comes up where I know that if I'm performing and if there's, it's not always, doesn't always work, but there are times when you're hitting it. The audience and you are on the same empathetic kind of harmonic wavelength. And when that happens, it's like, it's just a beautiful thing. So when I make a film, I don't necessarily, that's why I'm not a commercial artist. I'm really, the thing is, I'm not trying to sell this to a lot of people. I'm trying to get my own interpretation as purely as possible in the service of something that maybe somebody might want to hear about or
yeah,
so I've never had a really I don't have like a huge large audience, but I don't try to have one. It's
yeah.
never been my you know my reason to be to have a I think it's dangerous actually, and unless you're George Carlin. You have a really really big audience it can be really, especially now today, well, it can be
Yeah.
very tricky. More
Well,
people that
let's stay on that theme of filmmaking for a second too,
yeah.
because you made films. McLuhan says everything we invent extends some humanness. So, like the knife and fork extends our teeth, and
Yes, in
the
the
shutter,
the accident
yeah,
exposure of the arm, yeah, mhm.
right, and the shutter in a camera extends
The
our
eye.
eyelid. But even non-tangible, like religion or philosophy, maybe that extends consciousness. What does the movie camera, whether it's video or film, extend for you? What humanness does the moving image camera extend for you?
Well, I don't know why I'm on this theme today of teaching, but I just happened to be. And years ago, when I started making my first kind of films as a teaching artist, I would go into a school with little kids, and then when I would be editing, the most beautiful thing would happen. I would watch this film footage that I took, but I wasn't playing. You can't choreograph it. The kids are going to do what they do. But then I would watch the frames and I would see this little girl and I would see her like her eyes would open. Something beautiful would happen just with this one little girl. And I started to get mesmerized with, when you watch television, you're watching the plot and so there's a character, but how often do you just like don't watch the character and watch everything else that's going on in the frame other than the character? And that's something that I've started to pay much more attention to is um, okay, you want to tell a story, there's a narrative. Most everything, that's how we are. We've got to follow narratives. It's how it is. But within the story, there's all these peripheral things going on. And if you I don't know, if you watch a film and then if you watch it again and then you decide I'm not going to look at the main character, I'm just going to look at this little calendar that's on the wall, or there's somebody going by in the window. There's all of these amazing components that go into a frame.
Yeah.
And I'm not a feature filmmaker, but I do feel that what I am really good at is um, seeing not just the primary focus, but all the other things that create like a more comprehensive picture. And the viewer might not even be conscious of it, but
Yeah.
I am.
Yeah. You're like getting the big picture. You're comprehensive. Like there's many elements. And it's funny because you mentioned the word edit, Lisa, and I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Because I talked to Michael Apted 40 years ago,
Mm.
and I asked him, why do rock video editors feel so obliged to edit fast? And most people don't know Abel Gance invented rapid montage in 1922 in France, but in the 80s, it flourished with MTV. And even to the point where Marty Scorsese said he cuts his films faster because of MTV. And
That's cool.
what Michael Apted told me was because we've learned to take in information faster. And so I asked this question with a bias. Can we literally learn to take in information faster, or are we just brainwashed to believe we can?
Oh no, we're being forced to.
Yeah. The hidden question really is can humans literally multitask?
Oh, well, yeah, I think that's one of the interesting. I mean, it depends on the person, but yeah, and it also depends on your age, and your the freshness of your brain cells and stuff. But I'm not saying that it's a good thing that we're being forced to take in more information.
Yeah.
It's not a good thing, but we are being forced to do that. Yeah,
Yeah.
and we see it all over: anxiety, depression, students who just not just students, but people who uh, their brains they just you know
Well, it's funny because how much are we, I mean, boomers are stressing that kids are, losing this attentiveness. And there's this
yeah,
thing called TSA, tactile situation awareness, where a, a bomber pilot in a plane, when he gets bombed and his plane's going to go down, he's got to study 5, 6 gauges. He
right.
doesn't do that. He acts more on the word you've said, instinct. He goes on his instinct because he's not focused on one. And so there's some theories that kids now are, and you're like me, we call them kids, they're just younger people.
I know they're
But the
actually
kids are focused not on one thing. We grew up more being focused on, what are you going to be? I'm going to be a clown. I'm going to be a filmmaker. And in essence, what you've done is done that opposite. You've pursued many things and you never specialized. So they don't specialize so much. So I'm just curious how you see that in your students. You can tell me the disservices of their bombarded with information overload, but what's a service of it? What are they getting out of it in creating a new sort of talent or mutating the humanness? Yeah.
this is just so big, and I'll just try to stop
Yeah.
me if I go on too long. But for example, one of the things right now we're dealing with is the chat bots, where the students are now. It's so perfect, the
Yeah.
algorithms to plagiarize. But
Yeah.
the thing is, what is happening? There's a bunch of things happening in universities right now. Back in the day when we went to university, we might have thought, I'm going to take a ceramics course, or wow, graphic design, that's a new thing, let's try. But a lot of students now, they don't have the luxury of taking an elective. In fact, many of them are taking 18 or even 21 credit hours in a semester. And it's because a lot of them are going to school, working full time, if you can even imagine such a thing, going to school, working full time. And some of them are supporting their parents or their grandparents. And so for them, it's really a pipeline. It's you get in school, you just power your way through the curriculum. it's not about tasting different kinds of pieces of information. For most of them, they don't even have time to absorb the curriculum. They're just like, they got a saber. They're just cutting their way through it like Zorro, you know, this like, and so they don't, and this cuts right into this, connects right into this idea of information overload. They're being asked to do too much. They're exhausted. COVID just happened. Many of them, I'm sorry, but the TRUMP administration just went by. There's a huge change in how students visualize things now. It's just like this slow wave that I notice with students. And we assume that we can't assume that they're gonna be anything like we were. It is very different. Plus, they're carrying this burden of climate change, and a lot of them, they just don't want to carry it, but they have to carry it. I can't imagine what it's like, actually,
Yeah.
to be a 24-year-old person about to step off. The anxiety, the pressures to survive and to get a job. It's unreasonable what we're expecting of and this is 2 generations past us, pretty much.
Yep.
You know, so
Well,
yeah,
it's interesting, Lisa, because I think people like you being in the education world, helping them, guiding them is important. But
trying.
I also have a friend who teaches, and he said immediately, well, I want to teach a course on how to use chatbot,
Yes. Yes.
how to misuse it, how to reinvent it. It's like,
Yes.
oh no, don't say it's it's unforbidden. This is like every new tool has services and disservices. So we can't be overly scared. Yeah.
2 thumbs up, because the thing is, it's not going to go away.
Yeah.
But the one of the things that I think I haven't gotten in front of it yet. I'm not in front of this yet. I'm just knowing a little bit about this, but there are professors who get right out in front of it, and they try to figure out ways to not to discourage students from using it, but to encourage them to keep thinking independently and use the chat bot. Who knows what's going to happen in the next 5 or 10 years, really? Who knows?
Right.
But it's not going away, and there's nothing anybody can do about it. And probably if it's there for a reason.
Yeah.
But it does change the climate. David, my husband, and I, whom you've also interviewed, it's just this idea that we spend so many hours reading papers, and if you're going to be reading papers that were generated by a chatbot, it's like, well, fuck, man, like why spend this time to do this? I don't want to read and also the idea that to have independent thought, actually to be able to critically analyze something and to say, well, here's why I don't think this is right. Or most students are not going to step off and be these, like huge sort of like big thinkers. And I don't expect that of them, but they can use their university years. If they're going to be in university anyway, like why the hell don't you then use this opportunity to improve your writing skills, to think about something and then try to get it onto paper. And that's the weird thought that this might be sort of going by the wayside.
Yeah. It really goes along with McLuhan saying that the thing is, how do we invent new questions and new metaphors, in new ways to critically think? So I love you brought up the word taste, because it's a good way to go into music. My friend says the 3 T's of music are technique, theory, and taste. So technique, you can learn how to play an instrument. Theory, you can know the structure of chords. How does one acquire taste?
Oh, well, in my experience, for example, when let's see now, maybe about 30 years ago, I had never heard gamelan before. And I didn't know so much about microtonal music. I just didn't. I didn't know about it yet. And through my husband and through various tributaries of experience, I was introduced to gamelan. Now, for anybody out there who's never heard gamelan music, it's really based on, like, a lot of it is based on ringtones. Like there's these little instruments that look like cute little xylophones, but they're not supposed to be tuned exactly alike. Each one is supposed to have like a little tiny differential in it, so that when you play this huge, and a gamelan means orchestra, that's the Indonesian sort of term for orchestra. When you play all these instruments together and you don't know what it's, and you've never heard it, your brain is kind of going like completely cattywampus. It's like you just can't make any sense of it. But so when you talk about taste, when you immerse yourself long enough and attenuate your ear to what is going on, it suddenly opens you up to this whole other sort of possibility, this audio sonic possibility that is the sort of the exact opposite of what we listen to most of the time. If you listen to classical music, Western tuned instruments, which are beautiful. I mean, it's beautiful to listen to lovely classical or pop music. But when you start to listen to like world music and microtonal musical forms, your taste, it doesn't mean that you're going to love it all. And I don't, I don't love it all, but your taste can be an acquired, it's an acquired thing. And
Yeah.
so, yeah, gamelan was my introduction to this idea of, oh, wow, suddenly there's people like Marianne Amiche, who's not on the planet anymore, but composers who, and also I think her name is Liz Thompson. She's Earl Howard's wife, teaches at Purchase, a wonderful composer. And these are composers whose goal is to get into your brain using sort of mathematical um, Pythagoras and things like this, using mathematical theorems to pitch things to, that will actually make your ears start to they're playing around with your ear waves, with sound waves. And so it's not just about it being a listening experience. It's about listening to something that will start to kind of make your body react in a way that will change the way that you function for periods of time.
Yeah.
Which are meant actually to be really constructive experiences for the body. But so taste is a really interesting word, because, oh yeah, man, I love to listen to Joan Armatrading, Gene Redpath, and but there's also when I sit down and listen to favorite gamelan performances, or the difference between Balinese, which is very, very fast, and Javanese, which is very, very slow. Your taste can just keep expanding. It just, if you're open to it, it can just keep expanding.
Beautiful, because you led perfectly in the next question, Lisa, and that is a McLuhan quote that says, "Song is slowed down speech. The reason cultures have different musical taste is ultimately connected to language difference." Any comment on that? Because, you're talking about music from other countries.
Yeah. Well, just in terms of, for example, the Javanese, their musical kind of methodology is very, very slow and meditative. And they have, like, I think Bandung is one of the towns that we visited when we went there on tour, and they have it's a very sort of they have a very it's, nothing is rushed in Javanese music. It's all about the unfolding. Balinese music has very few vocal ornaments in it, but it's extremely percussive. And they actually, I don't even know if I've ever even heard a song in the Balinese gamelan tradition. I think it's mostly been from the Javanese and Sundanese traditions. I'm just using those as examples, but I've composed in those formats, and I will say that the stuff that I've composed is much more You can call it slower, but it's working through the language. So you're not rushing through it. You're kind of, and it's almost more like your voice becomes an instrument rather than like when pop singers, you have your story to tell in a pop song, and it's formulaic, but it, you know, gets people, it sells.
Yeah.
But in other musical forms, I would say that, yeah, it's more of, we don't think, they don't, perhaps the voice isn't so much a separate thing as it's supposed to be like a part of this. And that's interesting about gamelan as well, is that there's no like soloists, even though every so often the drum
Yeah.
comes out, and then maybe the bonan comes out or whatever, but you only have a little moment for that. It's not about like the vocalist being out the front and whoa, it's not about that. It's about the vocalist melting into, so the song actually becomes part of the dance. There's
It's
actually,
like it's integrated like a Mobius strip. There's no separation. You can't separate.
not really, and
Yeah.
sometimes the instruments themselves sound like voices. Like,
Yeah.
you can't tell sometimes, is that a voice or is that a suling or is that a rabab? It's and that's, I think that's very beautiful. That kind of approach to language, because it's language. I mean, music is language anyway.
Well, that's funny because the next question is, what's more fundamental, language or music?
I imagine probably music came along first.
Yeah.
Who knows? But somebody was banging on something at some point. I think
I
maybe,
agree.
you know what I mean? Maybe
Yeah.
before, So I imagine, but language is terribly important now.
Yes.
Very important now.
Tell me an instrumental that makes you laugh.
Oh, I'm trying to think of. Oh man, I can't. David could tell me this. It's this guy from the 50s. You probably know him. He did a lot of parodies of oh man, what's his
Spike
name?
Jones. You mean Spike Jones?
Yeah, Spike Jones is really funny.
Spike Jones. Yeah.
I'm the captain of the spaceship, all of the stuff that he did. Spike Jones is really funny. Oh, hello, mother. Hello, father. Those
Yeah.
are things from our backgrounds. Oh, there's a lot of funny things, I suppose, nowadays, but um, oh, well, anyway, no. Let's just stick with that.
Yeah, well, the other the thing you brought up was how music can be math. And Thelonious Monk said music is math. He also said there are no wrong notes. Any comment?
Well, he's a great musical clown, Thelonious Monk.
That's good.
He's the ultimate trickster, right?
He is.
Yeah.
Miles Davis said, he spoke about the space between notes. How do you integrate silence when you're composing a piece? How do you know when not to play?
Improvisation is more conducive to that idea of knowing when to, shut up and let other people. But when but I happen to be in terms of my composing, there's not a lot of silence in the stuff that if I'm making a soundtrack, or I just did a group of a little song cycle based on Virginia Woolf. She did this great BBC interview called "Words Fail Me," and I made a musical. It's more complicated than I'm talking about, and I don't want to take too much time. But I don't have a lot of silence in the music that I compose. There actually isn't much. There's always maybe a little through line of something going on, but I don't often have a lot of. Well, if I do something a cappella. Well, yes, then. Okay. There's a lot of a cappella pieces from my past, and there's a few new ones. And there's times when but it has also a lot to do with emotion. I I often will get a little bit emotional when I'm singing in front of a group, especially if it's a cappella. And if I start to cry or if things start to happen in that way, then I'll let the silence, I'll let people just feel what it is for a little bit. So yeah, there are little silences.
Beautiful. And, Copeland says the four elements of music are melody, harmony, rhythm, and tone color. Talk about how you integrate those four when you're composing a piece. Does one play a more important role to start off? Any rituals you have or any sort of inclinations to be more of a melody, harmony, rhythm, or tone color person? Or
Melody and tone color, because I am primarily a vocal composer, and
yeah,
then the instrumentation is there. It's very important, but I think the melody, I'm very careful with melodies,
yeah,
but actually the tone quality is maybe even more important than the melody. Painting. George O'Keeffe used to talk about this a lot, where and I have a great affinity for her, kind of matching how she approached painting, where she would say at one point in her life, she said, um, I couldn't use color. Like I just couldn't use it. And then like after a year and a half, then she started, finally she could use blue, you know? I mean, if you think about that, where she couldn't really, color wasn't part of what she was seeing. And then, and it was concerning her a little bit, I guess. But then eventually it's like blue came in. She was very grateful for that, that she could start to incorporate blue. Um, I feel like that also, that she said that oftentimes when she painted, she would see colors. I mean, she would hear color. No, she would hear colors. And I feel in a way like the flip side of that, where when I'm really developing a vocal piece, and for me, vocalism is prevalent. Um, I can kind of feel like where it's like painting. I can feel the line. Sometimes it has a color, but it's more that it's like a landscape rather than. So yeah, melody and tone color. I think that's what you had said. Those for me are the two most important parts. But I love percussion. I love a beat, but it doesn't necessarily always come into what I'm doing. In fact, it's the opposite, where I let go of meter altogether. I often let go of it, just let go of it, and it's conversational. Often.
nice. Yeah, what you taught me about George O'Keeffe was really important because it resonates with Twyla Tharp, the dancer. When she first got really serious about doing a dance troupe in New York,
Yeah.
for the first year, she said no music because she knew the rest of her career it's going to be all music based. So she says, I'm going to have a period where there's no music and we're going to dance in silence, like do without one major ingredient.
Mhm.
And it's funny because Ben Ratliff,
Were they counting? Were they counting?
well, I didn't memorize it that well. I think it's in the most recent documentary on her, which is amazing. It's worth, or she has a couple books, but she's really an articulate artist, and she's lasted so long and
Let
done
me
so.
share. Let me share a memory. So when I was
Please.
a freshman at Buff State in 1974, Twyla Tharp was a guest artist. Now that's kind of early in her career. But it was a beautiful. She did a lecture demonstration, and she talked about how her dances were all on graph paper. She
Yeah,
plotted everything out on graph paper, which I just thought that kind of blew my brain a little bit. I
yeah,
love this idea.
yeah.
Anyway,
Yeah, no, she's an amazing artist and she's had a great career. And the great thing is that she's around still. The movie entails her making dance pieces during COVID on Zoom. So
wow.
it's so restricting, but it's like, hey, I'll deal with the tools we have and I'll make the dance piece. So
Oh, yeah.
they tell the history too. But this this music writer, Ben Ratliff, says, I mean sound as it has long functioned among jazz players as a mystical term of art, as in every musician finally needs a sound, like a full and sensible embodiment of their artistic personality, such that it can be heard at best in a single note. So like me and you could hear Miles Davis a note or two and go, oh, that's Miles.
Yeah.
And what Ben would say is, that's fragile and pointed. For Coltrane, he says slightly undercooked and urgent. So if a music writer who you respected was going to describe Lisa's sound in a couple words, what 2 words would you say? They got it. They understand.
American primitive.
Oh, that is good. That is so good. That's like Frank Zappa had on his bio, American composer. That's it. No, nothing else, just 2 words.
But
So Lisa,
I will credit a dear friend of mine who I used to compose for, and who has been really immersed in music her whole life. Her name is Karen Haidt, and she's known me for about 40 years. And so she has. So when you ask that question, Karen came up right away, and she's the one who encapsulated this idea of American primitive, which feels right. It just really feels right.
it really captures it. What was the motive of the cave artist?
The motive of the cave artist?
Yeah, and whether it's cave music, cave dance, I mean, we're just lucky that we have cave art preserved, but we really don't have cave music or cave dance. But what do you think their motive was?
Well, to document their existence.
Yeah.
There was a great cartoon in New Yorker the other day. I think it was New Yorker, where these guys, recent guys were in a cave, and it was a cave with, mud prints. And the one guy says, hey, I need a little more mud over here. And he was he was in this beautiful cave with these prehistoric prints, but he's adding his own mud prints, and
Yeah.
I don't know. It's about existence. I was here. I'm here.
Yeah. Well, Hollis Frampton's a filmmaker who said narrative is born among the animal necessities of the spirit because we are waiting to die. Can you forget to die?
Less and less.
What's more important, conviction or compromise?
Conviction. Then compromise is going to come later. You got to first make a cut. You first have to have conviction. And then that eventually you're going to have to compromise, but you've got to start with,
Yeah.
what I would like to do. And then, you start to bump up against reasons why you can't do it just as if you wanted it. But then, you keep your conviction and you start to compromise.
Well, Lisa, you've accomplished a lot in your life. How do you rate these 3 elements, luck, skill, and ambition? What played the biggest role, second and third?
I have real clown timing. So luck is at the bottom of the pile for me. My timing is definitely clown. So I'm very rarely at the right place at the right time. I don't know. It's clown. But what was the other 2?
Skill and ambition.
I've always, if I would look at my journals from when I was a kid, because I used to really keep the journals, and I've always had the ambition, but I don't even think I would call it ambition. It was just, I don't know what. I just would write these things. I know I have to do this. I know I'm going to be this. I just would write this. So maybe ambition, but I just had I had a vision. I don't know. That's kind of how it was for me. And then I started just collecting skill, just sucking it up like a big sponge. And
beautiful. T.S. Eliot said, poetry is outing your inner dialogue. What language is your inner dialogue in?
Well, it's interesting that you talk about poetry. I have a lot of friends who have made their chapbooks, or actually a friend of mine was just, I nominated her to be the poet laureate of Mid-Hudson County, and she just got that, which is so fantastic. My friend Stephanie Russell. But I have a whole lot of poems. I've got a lot of poems. I used to write quite a bit, and I've never. It's weird because I have all these poems, but it never occurred to me, well, you should make a book out of them, or you should, share them with people or whatever. I use them every so often in the service of lyrics or whatever. But when you talk about how poetry, what was the question? How poetry?
He said that poetry is outing your inner dialogue. So the question is what language is your inner dialogue in?
Well, yeah. So just to finish then this little thought I had, one of the reasons why I might not want to push these things out there is because it's so intimate. Poetry is such an intimate pursuit. And for those poets who have the courage to, it's very, very vulnerable to be a poet.
Yeah.
And, so even though sometimes I'll think, well, that would be, you should let somebody read that. There's a part of me that just wants to keep, it's weird. It's strange to be a person who knows what it's like and knows how to appear in the limelight and knows how to take a stage, but also be so very ambivalent about being seen. It's a strange kettle of fish, those two things. But that's also indicative of me.
Well, Lisa, it anticipates the next question beautifully because two of my film heroes, their mantra is George Manupelli says, he says, ignore yourself. Jonas Mekas says, there is no self-expression. And whoops, still there?
I'm here, yes.
Oh, your camera just went off. Oh, there we go. Okay, sorry. So Cecil Taylor, avant-garde jazz pianist, says, I'm just a vehicle and this stuff just comes through me.
Hallelujah.
So so is art making more self-expression or more you're a vehicle for whatever cultures, technologies, and environments are dominant?
Well, I think the better you get at it, the more those two things work in tandem with each other.
Yeah.
Because I think we might have talked about this the last time. There's this idea, I think it's a Buteau idea, that we're just animated corpses. Remember we talked about this, the animated corpse?
Yeah.
So the thing is, some people come into a room and you don't notice them. They're just, you don't notice them. They have this and they might not want to be noticed. And there are other people who come into a room and they're like sun gods, or they just let themselves be known. Those two kinds of ways of being have a lot to do with how we animate the corpse, how we animate the corpse every day. So in terms of like the practice of being an artist, it's not that far off from being like a religious, a person who's really like a priest or nun, or a monk. I can't, but it's a practice that you get into this practice. You don't walk away from it. You get more and more into this practice. But in order to do that, you have to keep balancing these things that the world demands of us, which is to show up, as I often tell my students. You got to show up for class. You got to show up for class. If you don't show up for class, then what are you doing here? And that's a metaphor. I show up for class. Really, I do that. But the other part of it is, even though I might not be able to keep my mouth shut, there's a part of me that also is aware that it's not just about me. I can't keep being the center all the time. You have to move, you gotta, you can hear me, but you might not be able to see me. You have to kind of, you have to be generosity, empathy, humanity. And the artist carries these things. And the better you get at it, I think, the better you are at, disappearing into this thing that you're doing, and you show up hopefully, but you're just doing your work. You're just like you're just getting it done.
Well, it's funny, Lisa, because the next question is, can art making be egoless?
Yeah, I suppose it's like, when if you ask somebody, "Are you happy? Are you happy often? What does joy feel like?" Every so often, you have that. You really feel that. You feel,
Yeah.
and so with art, it's it depends on the person, of course, but yeah, I think that there can be these moments where it's like this watching this thing that's spinning, and it's like fantastic, and then of course eventually you got to get back into that. You have to connect yourself back in, but it's like letting it go. It's like,
Yeah.
oh, look how beautiful, oh, off it goes. And mm, yeah,
Beautiful.
those are
Is
lovely moments.
is perception reality?
Oh no. No, it isn't. It's okay, it's the eye of the beholder's reality.
Yeah.
uh, if I thought that, living in the world that we're living in right now, yeah, I would be checked out. I think I'd be checked out.
Lewis Carroll said, I believe as many as 6 impossible things before breakfast. Have you
Before what? Before what?
any before breakfast? Have have you have you believed in any impossible things lately?
Yeah, sure, sure. Uh, uh, there's ritual, there's the crossroads, there's liminal state, there's going from your mundane self to your higher power self. You never know. You just never
Yeah.
know.
Yeah.
So sure, of course, a big yes.
Lisa, tell me one major element of your creativeness that's changed and one major element that's stayed the same in the years you've been doing this.
Mm. Well, it's strange. Jerry, did you ever do you sometimes look at photographs of yourself when you were 6, or I don't
Yeah.
know, you know, and you see that person and you might not look exactly like that person anymore, but you're still that person. So that's what hasn't changed. Um, but all of the accumulated experience that makes me able to really walk around that 6-year-old person or whatever, and then
Yeah.
walk back, and maybe then walk 50 feet, 100 feet back from that person. Though that's, I guess, what has changed about. And I hope I'm not, a narcissist. Like I hope I'm not. But there's a part of being human where you have to. Uh, Without this, like you're not on the planet anymore. So there
Yeah.
is this kind of consciousness that you have to keep feeding it, um,
Yeah.
in order to animate this, this corpse types being. So I'm always very grateful. I'm very grateful to wake up in the morning. If I remember a dream, wow, that's like gravy. And
Yeah.
but as long as and sometimes I'm miserable, we're human beings, but I am very grateful to still be aware that this girl named Lisa is still here. And I'm older, getting older in my crone, whatever you want to call it. But it's funny, that you can maintain this beautiful sort of umbilical cord to your essential self, which
Yeah.
I really hope that I can hang on to as long as possible.
It's beautiful. Really well put. And Moshe Feldenkrais works with healing and movement. And he says it's literally possible to identify a weakness and incorporate it to become a strength rather than we're normally taught to overcome a weakness.
Mm.
Tell me a weakness you turned into a strength.
Um, it would take too long to describe the whole thing, but if you have a really traumatic event as a child, uh, which we've all have, but it reminds me of I have a nephew whom I haven't seen in many years, but he's kind of a haunted person, and he said at one point many years ago, Aunt Lisa, like, what do you do with your fear? How do you get rid of it? And I said, no, you don't get rid of it. You have to learn to kind of play with it and work with it. It's never going to go away. You have to kind of figure out how you're going to work with it, how you're going to play with it. And in my own life, a lot of the trajectory of my art practice, unfortunately, stems from a very big loss I had when I was at that age of, like 15, 16. I had a big loss, and that loss has really dictated a lot of the stuff that I do. But I feel like it's been very, like, a good. I've tried to make it, you know, uh, work for me in the best way possible. Because you can't you literally can't. It's not like what was it, the Jim Carrey, that film, something of the mind, where you could have part of your memory cut out or whatever.
Yeah,
Uh, you one doesn't want to do that. I
yeah,
think, I hope, and so the this idea of, now, I'm not speaking for people who are living through, you know, Ukraine and Sudan. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking more in a way the luxury that I had of working through this horrendous loss that I had without having to be displaced and homeless and a refugee. This, in a way, in a weird way, I had the luxury of learning how to deal with with trauma. Whereas
yeah,
many people, I'm not trying to lump myself in with those people, because that's a whole different thing.
yeah. Well, it is explaining what you said is explaining how do we turn a breakdown into a breakthrough,
Yeah.
or a rejection into a redirection.
Well, artists are really good at that.
Yeah, we are good at that. So, fill in the blank. Anger can be a productive emotion
When um, when there's another doorway that you can go through that will um, transcend or transmogrify that anger into something that is actually edible and nutritious.
oh, cool. What's the most significant difference between men and women, physical aside?
Oh, I will have to revisit that. That's too
That's
huge. That's too huge.
that's fine. What caused matriarchy?
What caused it?
Yeah.
Well, where? No, wait a minute.
You're answering you win, at Lisa.
No,
You're answering
no. Wait, I will say,
no,
okay, so,
you're answering a question with a question. That's my favorite thing. That's what we do in this series. So yeah, I mean,
oh, shit,
now
I'm
one
just
of
now
my friends,
catching on.
yeah, one of my friends questions that when there was matriarchy, but according to anthropologists,
There are.
Maria Gimbutas or Brianne Eisler, Charleston the Blade, there were
Yes,
matriarchal societies.
I read that. Oh, yes, and it's true. And there are still, for example, there's a tribe that I worked with, of women. Um, it's not just women, but it's called the Setuma. And in Estonia, along the Russian border, there's this very old matrilineal tribe. And I went and made a big piece with them in 1996 called Puhamu, which means sanctuary. I was working in Estonia a lot, and there was this tribe called the Setu, and I got a nice big grant to go over there. And this particular tribe, they're Russian and Estonian. They kind of operate on both sides of the border, but they're literally there, and they still are a matrilineal tribe. They sing. It's a beautiful culture. They sing all of their history, and it's the women who carry the songs. And I don't know if you know this, but like, for example, in shadow puppet plays in Indonesia, you might have the same melody, but you keep fitting current events into those same melodies. And that's what they do in shadow puppet shows in Indonesia.
Yeah.
Same with the Setu ladies, where we made this piece and they worked with me on it, and they took all of these sort of traditional, it's like a chant. It's almost like, you know, the Hungarian ladies for a while. They were very famous for those really interesting kind of harmonic chants that they were doing.
It's called the Bulgarians Women's Choir.
Bulgarian. But the Setu also do this, but it's a much more rustic form of singing.
Yeah.
And so there are still on the planet. They haven't been extincted yet. There are still matrilineal. And I love Riane Eisler. I read Chalice and the Blade years ago.
Amazing.
Man, it's a great book. But I will say that even though I'm not an expert in it, probably matrilineal tribes were way more prevalent, 10,000, 20,000 years ago, 50,000 years ago.
Beautiful, Lisa. There's a line that goes, "You create what you resist." Bob Goldthwait, the comedian, morphed it into, "You are what you hate." In fact, James Joyce said, "It's a curious thing how your mind is super saturated with the religion in which you say you disbelieve." And Louis Buñuel nailed it. He said, "Thank God I'm an atheist." So I was curious your thoughts on this line, "You create what you resist." I'm not saying you, Lisa, but one creates what one resists. Any thoughts on that line?
Well, I'm just going to go right back into the earlier kind of diatribe I was on, which is in my teaching right now, and I'm getting deeper and deeper into it, because the students there's been a shift. There's been a shift in the students' kind of points of views. A lot of those shifts have to do with a much more conservative, there's like a lot of conservative sort of things going on with students. And the stuff that I used to talk about in my classes, because I teach cross-cultural perspectives. It's like cultural anthropology, the introduction. I'm not an anthropologist, but as an artist, it works very well, teaching this idea of cross-cultural perspectives and how we either work or don't work when we fit ourselves together. And things that I used to say to my students without thinking, now I have to be very, very careful, because if I say something that to them sounds as if I'm being progressive, or if I'm leaving out, for example, the right in favor of the left, they come down on me about it. And this is something that I actually never had to think about before, because the university that I teach at has a mandate of multicultural. It's gorgeous. There's all these different groups of people that are there. It's great. But even those people who I thought of, that I assumed would be open to all different kinds of thought processes, since COVID and since the last administration, these things are changing right now. Yeah. So I forget exactly what it is that you asked me, what the crux of this was, but I am feeling much more sort of under a microscope in the educational world than I was before. And this also probably has to do with students who are just like, they have their nose to the grindstone and they've just got to get through this thing. So I have students who will write to me and say, "I'm not allowed to read anything about ritual because that's evil." Or if I talk about human beings being magic-ridden people, meaning that we believe in all sorts of phenomena. We just do. We have holidays and rituals, but they take it so literally, and they think of magic as a threat rather than as a an open door. And so I'm much more conscious of that now with my students.
Yeah. I know you talked about Edward Casey in our part one, and these are things that are important to study because they were part of our culture. And people go, that's pseudoscience. And I looked up pseudoscience once and it said fasting is pseudoscience. I like, what? So, I mean, look at, if they want to call fasting pseudoscience, that's fine. But it's like, it's something that we can do. In fact, if you have an operation, they tell you to fast and not eat for a day. So how pseudoscience is that?
It's
So,
strange that they would focus on that as a pseudoscience.
oh, it's just amazing because what we want to do is get the big picture of everything. So why restrict and cancel people out for saying this word? Let's understand, how has this word changed us? How has it shaped our behavior? Not,
Okay, look at Thomas Jefferson. Okay, Thomas Jefferson. Okay, he somehow he had a vision, and he wrote the basis for the Declaration of Independence. But I'm always talking to my students about this. He owned over 600 slaves.
Yeah.
His wife, Sally Hemings, he never gave her freedom papers, and he raised their 6 kids as slaves and then set them free when they were adults. Talk about a hypocrite, Thomas Jefferson. So, and he was credited in a way with introducing this idea of biased science to justify his oh shit moment when he wrote all men are created equal. That was his big, like, he had to figure out, like, what do we do now? And so, when you talk about this idea of biased science, it goes way, way back.
Yeah.
He's the father actually of systemic racism, Thomas Jefferson. Unfortunately, it's hard to say, but he is.
Yeah. How do you find peace of mind?
Well, I have a vodka in the evening, but no, it's working out. It's getting out into nature. It's just whenever I have the opportunity. My husband and I, we kayak. We're kayak freaks. Anytime I have the opportunity to just see that nature is still in its various forms on various parts of the planet, still doing what it's supposed to do, that gives me a sense of peace. It doesn't help to know that the climate is making it smaller and smaller, these opportunities for nature to do what it's supposed to do, because we've disrupted it so badly. But that kind of thing. And cooking, I'm a big cook. I was a professional cook for many years, and I while I'm at home, I've got soup on the stove or whatever. Just anything that connects me with an organic sort of activity, that makes me very happy. It's funny, like before I do a big performance, usually what I'll do is, like, I'll sweep the house or I'll sew on some buttons. I'll do something that's very, very mundane. And that gives me a sense of peace. That mundane activity.
I like that. I do that too. Lisa, if you were walking down the street today and you met yourself as a 12-year-old, what would you say to your 12-year-old self?
Because I never had kids, I would probably treat myself as the child that I never got to have. I would be very, very physical. I'd be very tender. I'd give as much love in that moment, however many moments. I would just do everything I possibly could to make that 12-year-old know that there was love in the world for her, and that it was going to be that way, and that, never forget that. Yeah, I would love that opportunity to be that person for myself.
I love that. My mom taught me the value of hugs, so I appreciated that one a lot.
Yes, she did.
Oh, yeah, that was
Can you
beautiful.
tell me a quick little bit about that?
Oh, she just said hugging is like therapy. I mean, one of my favorite answers ever was, what's your favorite form of information? And Craig Baldwin, the filmmaker, said human touch. And then Ann Magnuson said a hug. And we don't think of that as information, but a
Oh.
hug can be information. It's, you know, it's so many things.
How many times have you went to hug somebody and they're so ready to stop hugging? You know, it's just
Yeah.
like, yeah. And just this whole idea of allowing yourself to hug and it not being inappropriate, you know, like
Yeah.
there's not something weird about it. It's actually something where
Yeah.
you keep giving in more and more. Yeah,
Yeah.
I love that. I love that.
It is. It's a special thing.
Yeah.
So these are 5 quick Alan Watts questions. Excuse me.
Okay.
Alan Watts questions. Just off the top of your head in just a couple words. First one, who started it all?
Uh, this primordial soup.
Are we going to make it?
Who's we?
Very good. Where do we put it?
Try not to hang on to it.
Beautiful. Who's cleaning it up?
Mother Nature.
5, is it serious?
Yes.
Lisa, this has been so fun. We got 10 more minutes and I really appreciate it. Which way should toilet paper come off the roll, over or under?
Over.
Why?
That's the way I do it.
Well,
You know,
you're
it's funny. Sometimes I'll be in somebody else's house and I'll think, no, Lisa, don't do that.
right. Don't switch. Well, the patent has it 100 years old going over, but the people who there's like 5%, 90% of people say over, but the people who say under have their reasons.
It's a meme, actually. Toilet paper is a meme. Susan Blackmore, there's a great TED Talk. Susan Blackmore actually talks about this. The bizarre thing of going to a hotel room and the toilet paper is not only over, but it's been folded in this weird
Folded.
way.
Yeah.
It's this meme. Like, who folds this? Like, who's doing it?
Who's folding the toilet paper? If a publisher was to release your autobiography off the top of your head, what would the title be?
My life is a clown.
They want to scent the glue in the binding. What smell?
I like vanilla.
Oh, that's nice. If a statue was built in your honor, where would you want it displayed and what would it be made of?
Well, it'd be lovely if it was in a beautiful kind of forest that I like, a part of a forest that I like. And it would be made out of something that would very, very gradually erode, but in a beautiful way, just slowly over time. I
Yeah.
don't know, some sort of organic substance that things would grow on. Maybe bacteria would use it, would get from it. It'd be great to be you know, I talked to my kids the other day about funerary practices, and you can, you know, I'd like to be cremated, but you can get buried and become a plant. You know, you can be buried in a box that's infused with seeds and stuff. That would be a nice thing.
It
I
is.
don't even want to be above ground, maybe below ground and just composting.
Composting. You know who did that? One of the weavers. They said, cremate me and put me in my compost pile.
Yeah, that's nice. That's nice. Why not? It's just it's just a shell after you leave it.
Yep. Tell me something good you never had and you never want.
Um, something good I never had.
It's good you never had it, but you never want it.
I suppose unlimited wealth. You know, I
Yeah.
sometimes think to myself, what would it be like never to be anxious about
Yeah.
that? But yeah, I mean, come on.
Well, that's the 3 answers I get the most are fame, money, and heroin.
Oh, heroin. I never would have thought of that, but yeah. No, not heroin. It's too much of an escape, I suppose.
Yeah. So we just got about 5 more minutes, Lisa, and I was wondering if you could tell me how has being an educator shaped your behavior? And then how has being an artist and a musician shaped your behavior?
Well, those things go hand in hand because when you teach, uh, well, it depends on the kind of teacher you are, but it's really a performance. You know, you're performing for the kids, for the
Yeah.
students.
Yeah.
But it's not a thoughtless performance. A lot of thought goes into it. You want to catch, you want to keep catching, because a lot of students are just sitting in your room working on other things. You know, they got their computers, they're working on other coursework. And I'm not going to try to keep them from that. You can only, you can only be a fascist teacher up to a point. Then you just have to let it go. But I feel that this is a nice way to wrap this up is, we talked about clowning, which I came to later after I'd been already an actress and I'd been a composer, clown. But all of these things that you gather, thanks to this idea that Darwin talked about, just keeping, just keep pulling in all this stuff. These things just inform all of your actions after that. Once you get it, once you are informed about something, um, I wrote on the board the other day with my kids, knowledge is power. It truly is. And
Yeah.
sometimes it's great to be blissfully ignorant. It is lovely times when you can just be blissfully ignorant, just be an idiot for a little while. But most of the time, especially in this world, the more you are informed, it's your toolbox. You keep shoving that stuff into it. And then your brain just starts to instinctually use it. And so I feel that all of these things, I don't necessarily separate. I get paid, I get a bi-weekly paycheck for teaching. And I'm happy about it. It's the only time in my life when I've ever had like just a regular paycheck, which is nice, especially
Yeah.
now that I'm, heading into really senior. And as an artist, those things are spotty. You get a big grant, you get paid for something, but it's not like you get this paycheck. But however, if you just wipe those things away about the finances, um, those things, being an educator and being an artist, I think are both uh, they're necessary right now on the planet. And maybe they always have been. But you know how they'll say, somebody will say those people who teach don't do or whatever. Those who
Yeah.
teach, I forget what the saying is, but
Yeah.
it's absolutely not true.
Yeah.
You invest whatever you're going to do, you invest in it. You
Yeah.
make an investment, and that investment produces not only an expanded awareness, consciousness raising, but it also helps to inform every other action that you're going to be doing.
Yeah.
And what else are we supposed to be doing here?
Duh. That was beautiful. Well put. We got 3 more and we're out of here. What's the cultural shift you see developing today that inspires you?
That's really hard for me to find. I'm having a hard time finding that.
Yeah.
Um, I keep hoping, and I have many students who exhibit the the potential for really like the scales maybe dropping or the eyes, So it's student culture that I'm just hoping.
Yeah.
I don't think that I think that we're going to be extincting ourselves. Maybe 200 years, I don't know, 250 years. I really don't see Elizabeth Colbert, I think it was in, I don't know, August or something. She wrote this amazing article, The A to Z of Climate Disruption. You might have read it, but the thing is we probably won't be able to get it together because we're so flawed as human beings. We can't, Massachusetts has this great green thing they want to do, but New Hampshire has to allow them to have I don't know, a green pipeline from Maine in order to do it. New Hampshire says no. It's like all over the country and all over the world that one city or one state will stomp on your plan to do something that will actually bring us to a better place. And
Yeah.
I don't think we're gonna transcend that in time.
Yeah.
So my students, I'm trying not to let them know how pessimistic I feel, but also to kind of give them fuel. I'm trying to give them enough fuel to get them through university so that they can just start pedaling that bike of life, and giving them what they need to just keep going, just to keep going.
Really good. Thornton Wilder said, art is confession. Art is the secret told. But art is not only the desire to tell one's secret, it's the desire to tell it and hide it at the same time. You've laid your cards on the table for over 90 minutes. I'm not insinuating you haven't already answered this. What's it really all about for you?
Uh, I'm just I have this piece called Shelter that opened in a museum, beautiful contemporary art museum in Buffalo in 2021. I'm working now with a arts curator who she's trying to help me to get this piece in museums around the country. And what I am trying to do, I can't make art anymore unless it has something to do with social, because there's nothing else. What sense does it make to make a piece of art if it doesn't have to do with what we're going through at the moment? That's how I feel.
Yeah.
So but it's a good challenge. And but and if I had that untold wealth, that limitless wealth we talked about earlier, I could just go ahead and do that. But the challenge is for me to keep trying to figure out ways to make something happen with materials that I have access to, and try and to not be overwhelmed by the idea or the reality that I'm only going to be able to do a certain number of things in my life. And a lot of those things end up in my filing cabinet because, because of how it is.
Yeah, I know about those filing cabinets. We're making a movie right now about archives. Like, what do we do with all this stuff we've saved? And it's an amazing thing. We should talk to you about it. But
well, document it, Jerry. Document it.
Oh, it's a good documentary. But I mean, it's in the process, but we're documenting.
Well, I want to see it.
We're documenting the documented. We're documenting the documentation. So, but what you just said reminded me of what Frank Zappa said. He goes, "Don't stop and keep going."
That's basically it. Simply put.
Yeah.
Simply put.
Last question, Lisa. It's really been fun. I really thank you.
Yeah.
What
you too, Jerry.
What gives you the most optimism?
Empathy.
Yeah.
As long as a person can plug in, I had my students for their first 2-page essay. I don't know. Have you heard of the Legacy Museum down in Montgomery, Alabama?
Yes, I have. Yeah.
Well, David and I went over our winter break, and it's so powerful, so emotionally impactful. And I introduced my students to it, and basically, I gave them an opportunity to really dive into what the American narrative actually really is. And Brian Stevenson, who was the visionary behind the Legacy Museum, he's an amazing person. Some people might say, oh, he's just like opening up this wound. But the thing is, we need to own our histories. We need to own it.
Yeah.
And denialism is not a good thing.
Yeah.
It's fun to be, as I mentioned before, to be blissfully ignorant. Okay, you could trip out on something and just forget about things for a while. But by and large, if we're going to go forward into anything, especially in this country, we have to own it, not just and especially for Black people, but everybody's got to own it. Everybody can't just be one group of people. We've all got to go, oh, holy shit, man. Oh my God. And then off we go into something that could be, at least for a little while, a new beginning, an optimistic viewpoint on the state of humanity. And this is just in America. I mean, what a mess. But anyway, you look how wonderful we can talk and
I know this been amazing because Lisa, the whole thing is set up with the theme you just accentuated so beautifully. Is the first question is what's the best thing for a human being? And Wilhelm Reich said the best thing for a human being is another human being.
Yeah.
And the last question is
Yeah.
from what they asked Groucho Marx at the end of his life. What gives you the most optimism? And Groucho said, other people. So
Yeah.
it's really about empathy is with other people, your stress of this empathy and inclusiveness, everyone. So it's
And
sure been
letting altruism, because altruism is tricky, but letting altruism really, really play itself out in this idea that I got to save that person. Oh, whoa, I got to save them, or whatever. However, altruism works. If we can keep it spinning, who knows? Maybe we'll get another 100 or 200 years out of it. Who knows?
Yeah. Well, it's like some graffiti I saw in a back alley in Venice. It's by A.A. Milne, the guy who did Winnie the Pooh. It said,
Yeah.
weeds can be flowers once you get to know them.
Oh, yeah. Beautiful. Yes, that is beautiful.
You got to have empathy. So thank you so much for stressing this,
Oh,
Lisa, to me and all your art in the clown and music. It's really been fun. Thank you so much. And
thank
even
you.
though even though I'm going to hit the end broadcast button, I hope this never ends and we can keep talking forever and ever.
Well, Dave and I are going to take a trip out to California, so we'll make sure to pay a visit to you.
Come to Venice. I'll show you around. We'll have a ball. Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you, Jerry. Thank you so much. Good night now.
Love you.